Hey, everybody, and welcome back to Between the 20s. It is Amer, Bryce, and Mike, as per usual, here on our podcast/YouTube channel. If you've been watching, you'll know that we've given out the top 10 quarterbacks and our top 10 running backs for the 2021-2022 fantasy football season. And today we're going to keep that going with some top 10 wide receivers. But before we get into that, I got to know, Mike, Amer, how are you guys doing?
Oh, I'm doing well, B. We're here in August. It's a little sad because, summer is kind of winding down a little bit, but we are in the month that Taylor Swift famously sung about in her album Folklore, which, by the way, won Album of the Year at the Grammys, in case you weren't keyed in, but doing well.
Of course, we couldn't make it one show without the requisite Taylor Swift reference, but Amer, how about you?
I'm doing good. A little bit worse after that Taylor Swift reference from Mike. But football's here, guys. There's not another Sunday until February without NFL football. And I know there's preseason, but still football. And after a couple months, after a lot of months of no football, this is welcome. So I'm ready to get going. Let's go.
We're still a month and a half until I start tuning in regularly, though, because, baseball's on.
Okay.
You know what? Amen.
Mets, Mike, only a couple months because we know the Mets will be out of it in just a little bit. So.
That's right. Phillies are in first place.
Half a game, B. Mets are going to take these last two.
In case the viewers weren't aware, Mr. Mike here is a very unfortunate New York Mets fan. So despite the Javi Baez pickup, doesn't look too good for the Queens boys. But we're here to talk about some football today. And Amer, amen to what you said, man. Football is around the corner. We're starting to think about fantasy football for real. And we know what's going on. Many camps have started, training camps, Hall of Fame game, a lot of stuff going on. But with our top 10 receivers, not a lot of surprises here, if I do say so myself. And of course, the consensus number one on this list, Green Bay Packers receiver Davante Adams. Guy was an absolute stud last year. Aaron Rodgers is back, baby. He is playing for the Pack. I don't know what more else there is to say other than the fact that this guy is a touchdown machine. Mike, Amer, you guys have anything to add on Davante Adams being the consensus number one?
I think the one thing I want to add is just I had him as my receiver last year, and he wasn't a consensus number one overall, I believe. But, I had the insight and the foresight to pick him up in the draft.
Okay, you took him second. It's second wide receiver too. Okay, Mike, good for you.
I took him in the second round. That's right.
He did. He sniped him a pick before me.
Yeah, I mean, with Aaron Rodgers back, locked and loaded. Absolutely send it. No doubts here. Next year, they'll probably both be gone, but enjoy this year while it lasts. So easy, number one. Not bad.
Even though they're missing key pieces in their offense that Aaron Rodgers pointed to, like John Kuhn.
Fullback, okay.
Who can forget John Kuhn? Just
all the people
all
the people of the Packers organization let go.
Oh man, Aaron Rodgers. It's going to be fun to watch what happens in Wisconsin this year. Just the personalities on that team for sure. Next up, actually, we're going to do a couple of these guys together. 2 and 3 are Stefan Diggs and Tyree Kill. So with these guys, Mike and I, we have Stefan Diggs each at 2. Amer has him at 3. Tyree Kill is a little different. Amer, you have him at 2. Mike has him at 3, and I have him at 4. So we do have a bit of a consensus difference on our number 3 and number 2 receivers here. Remember, we are doing half-point PPR for these rankings, but Diggs at 2. Some would say a surprise. Some would say not, going to the Bills and just having a stellar season out there in Buffalo. And then Tyree Kill. There isn't much more to say on this guy. You're working with the best quarterback in football, best speed in football. Can't go wrong with either of these. But Mike and I have him at 2. Amer, you have Tyree Kill at 2. Kind of, what are some of the differences that you saw between these players? And Amer, why did you have Hill higher than Diggs?
Yeah, I just think the offense is better. Obviously, we know the Chiefs' offense is the best. You want the best wide receiver on the best offense in football, and I think Tyreek Hill just gives you everything you're looking for. He used to be kind of a boom bust guy when Alex Smith was in there, and then Patrick Mahomes came in, revolutionized, so totally changed that offense. And so I just think Tyreek Hill gives you a little bit more upside than Stephon Diggs. I think, especially if it was full PPR, I might consider it since Diggs is coming off of a year where he led the league in receptions. But I just think Tyreek Hill's better. I mean, he's been a little bit more consistent. I have Diggs at 2, so no disrespect there. Or at 3, but no disrespect there.
Yeah, and I think I have Hill below Diggs just because of sort of a lot of Hill's. I mean, obviously he's a receiver who's going to get, solid at least 15 fantasy points, if not more, a week. But a lot of the variation beyond that just comes from his kind of big play upside, where I feel you can get a bit more value from Stefon Diggs week in, week out, and kind of a bit more of a consistent performance, as opposed to, it can be a big difference at times whether or not Tyree Kill has that 70-yard touchdown catch on top of his 100-yard touchdown performance. But having to wonder what week that is a little bit more unnerving for me.
Yeah, those are all both really good points. Mike, I think I lean more towards what you were saying. If I'm taking a wide receiver 1, I might take a guy with some more stability, a guy like Stefon Diggs. You can always go out and get someone like a CeeDee Lamb and Amari Cooper on the explosive Cowboy offense as your high-end wide receiver 2, who has that boom-bust potential. But as always, it's about balancing out your team. So if you do take a guy like Tyree Kill, maybe you go for someone that's a little more safe, say DJ Moore, Kein Allen, who actually we'll get to a little bit later as another receiver option. So those are our top 3, Davante Adams, Stefon Diggs, and Tyree Kill. And then we move to an interesting case here. Deandre Hopkins of the Arizona Cardinals comes in at 4th, playing with Kyler Murray. Kyler Murray is a fantasy darling this year. Really came on the scene last year as expected. So I have him at 3. Amir and Mike, you both have him at 4. So we have him in this grouping. But I do have him more in this lofted tier 1. And I think this tier 1 is more of those 4 guys. For you guys, do you think DeAndre Hopkins is the bottom of tier 1, or does he start tier 2 and the break is Tyreek Hill?
I think he is at the top of tier 2. And I think that those 3 that we talked about before have a chance to be the number 1 wide receiver. I don't think that DeAndre Hopkins has I don't think it's in the range of possibilities for DeAndre Hopkins to be the wide receiver 1 this year, which is why he's not at tier 1 for me. But like you were saying, Kyler Murray is going to take a step forward this year. His offense is going to be much improved. They improved their offensive line. They run a ton of plays. I think they were first in pace of play last year. So they run a ton of plays, this offense, kind of that college style. And more plays equals more opportunities, more fantasy points. So great wide receiver 1.
Yeah, it's a tough distinction, but I tend to side with Amir and sort of high end of the second tier. I also just thinking that division is tough in terms of defenses. I mean, you have the 49ers and the Rams right there. So having to play them, that's 4 games on your schedule where, you're going to have to really game plan and rely on, what's the coach name? I want to say Chris Christopherson, but that's the
Cliff Kingsbury.
Cliff Kingsbury.
Close enough. Close enough.
But yeah, I mean, he's really going to have to scheme to get around those defenses. And, DeAndre Hopkins is skilled, but there are still some questions in his offense. Whereas I feel Davante Adams and Tyree Kill, those 2 offenses are definitely a bit more solid. And then the Bills is still a bit of a young infantile offense, but I do think that, it's just generally stronger than the Cardinals for DeAndre Hopkins.
All good points, guys. There's definitely some risks around DeAndre Hopkins this year, some more risk than we've seen in the past. Not to mention targets are going to get eaten up. They have guys there, like Christian Kirk took on a bigger role last year. So we'll see what happens
as well.
Yeah, he did. This is also true. So they will be a very interesting team to look at. But that rounds out our top 4. Then we move back into a consensus for our consensus top 5. The new number 1 target for Matt Ryan, Mr. Calvin Ridley, who was a fantasy stud early last season, tailed off a little bit towards the end, but he's still absolutely a top 5 wide receiver. Mike, we'll start with you. What do you think about Calvin Ridley, and why is he your top 5 in your top 5?
Well, I mean, he's there just because I feel like I'm not bullish on Calvin Ridley, if you couldn't tell by that first 10 seconds of my answering your question. It's just, I have no feel for this Falcons team where this could be the cliff year for Matt Ryan. I mean, they were 4-12 last year. And I'm just, how much of that is the defense? How much of that is the aging offense? How much can we rely on the offense to continue this year? But I mean, Calvin Ridley, we're just looking a little bit more on the positive side. Calvin Ridley is the number one wide receiver on an offense that has been dependable for a few years, even though the success of the team has varied. Matt Ryan has been relatively dependable. And I just feel that after this, you're getting wide receivers that are a little bit less proven week in, week out. I feel like Calvin Ridley, having him as your wide receiver one, and kind of locking that in, you can be comfortable with that because he is number one. He is wide receiver one on a team that is relatively pass heavy. And so that kind of makes you a little bit excited, but at the same time, there is a lot of that risk that brings him below the four wide receivers we've talked about already.
Yeah, I like Calvin Ridley way more than Mike does. I think this guy is going to I think this guy's going to explode this year. If you just look at the Falcons offense, running game, non-existent. Julio Jones is now gone, obviously. And in games last year where Julio was not there, he was hurt. He had missed a few games last year. Calvin Ridley was unbelievable. And Calvin Ridley has seemed to be in his career a guy that can find the end zone. In his first year, he scored a ton of touchdowns. He had a little bit of a dip in his second year, but last year he scored a ton as well. And with all those targets gone from Julio Jones, this could turn into a situation where Calvin Ridley becomes what Julio Jones was in terms of targets, receptions, and yards, which is 1,400, which is unbelievable every year. Plus, his ability to find the end zone makes this guy unbelievable. And I think Calvin Ridley is going to be awesome. I know Kyle Pitts is coming in, but rookie tight ends aren't always the best. And behind him, there's not much else in that offense. So I think he's the guy in an offense that's going to be good. And even if they're not as good as we think, I think Calvin Ridley is still going to take the reins.
So now I'm curious, Honor, who do you feel has a better probability of being wide receiver one, DeAndre Hopkins or Calvin Ridley?
Oh, I think it's absolutely Calvin Ridley. But
wow. Okay.
If you're talking about the peak and the upside, I think Calvin Ridley's got more upside. But I think he's
no. I get we can understand like why he's ranked lower,
less safe.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Bryce, what do you have to weigh in on the Calvin Ridley discussion?
I'd also say Calvin Ridley is the better chance. The sky is the absolute limit for this guy. Amr said it. He's the only weapon, unless you count Kyle Pitts, who, as we know, receiver targets and tight end targets don't usually correlate. So I'm not too worried about him taking anything. The defense is not improved. They used their first round pick on a tight end. This defense is not good. That's the only way to put it. They're going to throw, and they're going to throw a lot. Calvin Ridley might lead the league in targets this year, which means he might lead the league in catches. And as Amr said, he's got a nose for the end zone. I love him this year. I actually had an opportunity to trade for Calvin Ridley in one of my keeper leagues. I elected to trade for Stefan Diggs. So that shows you how I think about those two guys. But Cal Ridley, if Stefan Diggs wasn't an option, would have been an absolute target for me because his upside is through the roof. So very bullish on Cal Ridley this year. Opportunity alone.
And you guys, there's no risk for you that the Falcons are just like the Bears offense last year. Matt Ryan is just that good. I'm just
look at Allen Robinson. Just look at
Allen Robinson. They have no weapons outside of Calvin Ridley and Kyle Pitts. The offensive line isn't very good. Like we're just
they have a fine. It's fine. The Bears offensive line was horrible last year. It's not even comparable to the Falcons offensive line.
Mike, what about Allen Robinson? Allen Robinson had a wide receiver one finish last year in an offense that's significantly worse with
I know, but wide receiver one
versus
play. Wide receiver number 5 overall are a little different for me.
But are you like you're really comparing Matt Ryan to Nick Foles and Mitch Trubisky from last year? Like, not even close.
I'm just saying there's that you got to be worried about just that total stagnant offense.
It's a bad team, but it's not a bad offense.
Okay. All right. You guys have made me a little hotter on DeAndre Hopkins, a little higher, but I still have my doubts.
Okay.
All right. Some dissension with Calvin Ridley, despite being a unanimous top 5 receiver among this group. That does
Yeah,
bring us now.
but that also shows you how serious my doubts are relative to everything else.
This is true because the rest of Mike's list is a bit interesting when it comes to how we've now ranked our bottom half of this top 10. Let's start with AJ Brown is our number 6 overall receiver. Now has a running mate in Julio Jones, just absolutely elite. AJ Brown, I don't know about you guys, he seems to be Julio Jones' number 1 fan. Seemed to be that the entire offseason. But Ryan Tannehill was great, despite throwing 15 to 20 times a game. AJ Brown has huge play potential. He does have some floor, and he does come in here as our number 6 receiver. There is some dissension. Mike has him highest at 6. Amer's got him at 7, and I have him at 8. I'm a little bit lower, just an opportunity with Julio Jones in there, and not as much volume in the offense. That's really it for me. But Mike, I'll kick it back to you, and Amer, I'll get you going first on some of these later guys. But Mike, give him higher than both of us. Why so high on AJ Brown?
I mean, AJ Brown's a proven commodity, and I think the doubt here is more on the impact of Julio Jones, because Julio Jones can go out there and have I think they both could have monster years. And I think that, the Titans, if they are both performing well and the passing offense is going that well, I feel like the Titans can institute a little bit more passing for sure. But I also feel when you have those veterans move teams late in their careers, you always get a little scared. There's always that little fear that, maybe they've moved on because their talent is not there and they don't have the potential to have that same performance. I mean, look at, there are a lot of examples that aren't coming to the top of my head right now, but I mean, it's just, you always got to start to doubt when that happens. And I think that AJ Brown is still going to be the wide receiver 1 down there in Tennessee. The offense is very good in general. And I just think he's a little bit more proven than I'd say the 4 guys we're going to have in the remainder of this segment, I should say. But yeah, I like AJ Brown in terms of very solid.
Yeah, I think I'm a little bit lower than Mike, but I am higher than Bryce, so I'm in the middle. But I think if Julio Jones wasn't there, this guy would elevate top 5 easy for me. I think with the addition of Julio Jones, or I should say before Julio Jones came, the Titans offense had a lot of departures in the passing game. Jonnu Smith and Corey Davis were really the 2 big ones, which
Corey Davis, very missed by fantasy owners.
Well, he did eat targets, so not necessarily fantasy relevant, but he was an impact on AJ Brown. And so without those guys, we were looking at an offense that throws somewhat. They were definitely a run first team with King Henry, but the entire passing game was focused on AJ Brown. And now with the addition of Julio Jones, you lose those targets in an offense that is not going to pass as much as you would hope for a team that you think should have 2 top 15 wide receivers. And so I think they're going to kind of take away from each other on a team that already isn't pass first, which is kind of why he's a little bit lower than he is for Mike. And he was before the Julio Jones trade.
Yeah, I think the best comment on the Titans passing offense that I had heard was, by acquiring Julio Jones, that's like buying a Ferrari and leaving it in the garage. So if that lets you know what the Titans passing offense is like, I'm not sure what else does.
I thought of at least one example of a veteran. Look at Le'Veon Bell. Please. Scary. He goes to the Jets. The Jets think they're going to take off. Do not. Le'Veon Bell, a few weeks later, he's off the team. That's the first example of many that I'm going to think of as the show goes on. So
but does Adam Gase coach the Titans? Thank you, Mike. Mike Vrabel is a good coach.
I guess I'm gonna keep thinking on some more veteran examples here.
Please let us know, and viewers, watch out for our Mike's example show that's going to come separately.
Jason Bay in baseball.
Mike is just a little salty that Jason Bay, he bought a jersey and Jason Bay sucked.
How deep are we going to go with this? Are we going to go into like minor league baseball or like hockey now with these old veterans? Come on, Mike.
Oh man, but classic with some Mike defense here. Just thinking about some of those ideas. Bring us down to number 7. Somewhat of a, I would say, surprise number 1 target in the Pacific Northwest. DK Metcalf really arose as Russell Wilson's go-to guy above Tyler Lockett, who, for the record, cannot stop finding the end zone. But DK Metcalf is the guy that we see in the top 10. We all have him right around the same spot. Mike and I both at 7, Amer at 8. Amer, we'll start with you as he's a touch lower. He's just behind AJ Brown, but behind one other receiver who we'll get to next. Why a touch lower on DK Metcalf than some of these other guys?
So I think DK is going to take another step forward. He's going to be unbelievable. But if you look at last year's production, it was insanity. And this is for the entire Seattle team. Insanity for the first 8-9 weeks. And then after that, it got tough. Russell Wilson played worse. And Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf both became very inconsistent options. They had weeks where they would win you a week, 3 touchdowns, 1,000 yards, whatever. They would go crazy for weeks, but they would also have stretches where they would kind of be invisible when the offense struggled. And I think that the Seahawks are going to try to get back to running the ball more than they did last year. And I think that will obviously decreases the targets, decreases the passing opportunities for both of these guys. And I think that's kind of the core of my lowered opinion on DK. I think just the combination of the end of last year and the focus on the running game that I think we're going to see is why I have him just a tick lower than you guys. One thing I will say is I think the gap between DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett is way too big in terms of ADP. Tyler Lockett is in, I think, the 5th round of drafts. DK's in the 2nd. I would much rather, if I'm getting a piece of this offense, I would much rather spend a 5th round pick on Tyler Lockett than a 2nd round pick on DK Metcalf. We're just looking at the values there. So I think that
Sleeper
gap is too
here.
much. So, I mean, I'm not putting Tyler Lockett in my top 10 or anywhere close, but if we're looking at draft values, I think DK is solid. He's a solid pick, and he'll be a good pick in the 2nd round. But if we're looking for value, I'm going Tyler Lockett in the 5th.
Mike, any thoughts on the big man from Ole Miss?
I don't have too much to add about my doppelganger. Exactly. I don't have too much to add. I think. I just think you have here a wide receiver 1 at worst 1A, an offense with a very solid quarterback, a good coach, and that tends to be pretty pass heavy. So I think those are all positives here. And I don't think we see the same upside from DK Metcalf that we saw from the other 6 receivers we've talked about so far, but I just feel like he, is a very solid commodity entering this year. By that same point, do I think that I feel probably very comfortable drafting him at his ADP? I don't know. But he is here at number 7 on our wide receiver list.
Yeah. Wide receiver 7 is kind of a back end, depending on how many teams you play within your league, kind of a back end of the 2nd round kind of ADP spot, which is right around where he's going. But it's a question of whether or not you really believe in the offense and believe that they will pass a little bit more than Pete Carroll maybe let it on. But if you've noticed the trend so far, each of these top 7 receivers have shown up in our top 8 individually. With our bottom 3 receivers in the top 10, we now reach some dissension pretty much across the board. Our number 8 receiver is a guy that's one of my favorite players, not just in fantasy football, but in the NFL in general. Minnesota Vikings now 2nd-year receiver, Justin Jefferson. Fair warning, he did get hurt a little bit yesterday in training camp, but they do say it is nothing serious, no broken collarbone, as people feared. So Justin Jefferson should be all set for week 1. But there is some dissension. Mike and I each have him ranked 9th, despite me saying I'm very bullish on him. He could be, just like Calvin Ridley, a real shot at number 1 overall. Amer, you have him at number 6, which is very, very high for a 2nd-year receiver. Why so high, especially knowing that you're not that high on Kirk Cousins?
Yeah, so I think Kirk is fine. I think he can support 2 top 20 wide receivers. I think that's what you can ask for in terms of fantasy.
And I think also in supporting 2 top receivers, it's Thielen's value comes from his touchdowns, whereas Jefferson's more of a yard guy. So you can kind of understand the difference in terms of how they have 2 top 20 guys on their team.
Right.
Very true, which does mean that Jefferson has floor, whereas Thielen might have more boom bust ceiling, which actually feels like the opposite narrative of when it was Thielen Diggs in Minnesota. But
and I thought Bryce's fair warning also was going to be that I had drafted him and was going to, of course, mention that I did draft him in our league last year. I had him and Devontae Adams as my wide receivers. And with that, I will just say that there's nothing more frustrating than watching the Justin Jefferson lead the Vikings down the field only to see Adam Thielen score a
touchdown. Yeah, so I like Jefferson because I think that his floor, as Bryce said, is great. You can really track yards. Yards are pretty consistent. Receptions, targets are pretty consistent over the years. Whereas touchdowns can be anywhere. They're very volatile from year to year. And so that's a good thing for Justin Jefferson, who had 1,400 yards last year, which is unbelievable for a rookie, one of the best rookie seasons in history. I just think he's going to build on that. He's going to be a reception, yards, target machine this year, which gives you a great floor, very, very safe guy as your wide receiver 1. And I think that's a great way to start your wide receiver core. You can follow that up with kind of a volatile, more boom bust wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 to help you win those weeks. But with that solid foundation, I like taking Justin Jefferson pretty high in drafts, which is why I'm higher than you guys.
Mike, any remaining thoughts on Justin Jefferson?
I think I've offered all of them. I just wanted to get my brag in there and point out that Adam Thielen can be really annoying at times. But
true.
Yeah.
Mike, to one up the brag, I took Justin Jefferson in a different league in the 7th round, and I will
not in our league though, B. In our league, it's all that matters.
Sure. Fair enough. But a little bit of dissension on Justin Jefferson, but I think across the board, we can all say that 1, incredibly safe pick, and 2, tremendous upside on this guy. Cannot go wrong with Justin Jefferson. Just be prepared to potentially pay up because you could have guys ranking him in the top 5, at which point he might go at the beginning of the 2nd round, which is kind of above where most people might want to take him, depending on how you feel.
That is too rich for my blood. I am highest, but top of the 2nd that's some prime real estate in drafts.
I just have to say, I'm not that happy with the end of the 1st round and most of the 2nd round in this draft. They're all a bunch of guys that make me feel
Mike's just going to trade out in the 2nd round and pile up on 4th round picks. So Belichick the whole thing. But that does bring us to our number 9 receiver and some more dissension here. And this is actually dissension on my part. So I will let you guys say your piece first, and then I'll come back and talk about this guy after. But number 9 is the Charger number 1 receiver, Kein Allen. Came in last year with some down expectations, right? We didn't know what he was going to be like with Tyrod Taylor, but Tyrod Taylor eventually does get hurt in that fluke accident, letting Justin Herbert come in. And Justin Herbert was, frankly, exceptional. Set rookie records in yards and touchdowns. Kein Allen was a major factor in that. Huge target share. I have him ranked at 6. Amer, you have him ranked at 9, and Mike is actually lowest right here at 10, also within the top 10, but I'm sure I'm a little more bullish on him. So, Mike, we'll start with you. You're the lowest. It's still top 10 in fairness, but how do you feel about Kein Allen going in? And just a hunch here, it's probably something to do with Justin Herbert, would be my guess.
I mean, Justin Herbert, we're looking at a very young quarterback who had a very successful first year, yes, but there are some doubts. I mean, teams start to figure out the way that you perform in year 2. They start being able to defend against it a little better, and I think you just have to throw up some red flags here in terms of how good exactly Kein Allen can be if the offense is struggling a little bit more than last year and isn't as successful. So that's kind of where almost all of my doubt comes from.
My doubt does not come from Justin Herbert at all, actually. I think Justin Herbert's got it. I was wrong about him. I thought coming out of college he was not that good. He proved me wrong. He's got the juice. He's got it. Justin Herbert's good. And that's why Kein Allen has elevated into this level, into this back end wide receiver 1 level. And that's why this Chargers team is going to be better this year. The one thing I will say about Kein Allen, though, I think his touchdowns just never seem to come. He seems to be kind of that guy. He always gets, 6 receptions for 80 yards, 80 to 100 yards every week, which is fine, but it's not really what you're looking for in that wide receiver one realm. And maybe this offense can take a step forward, score a lot more, and become a better offense, in which case Kein Allen will elevate. But the reason I have him at 9 instead of 6 is just because I'm not sure that this team is going to be in the top. Is going to be a top 10 offense this year. So that's why I'm not a huge Kein Allen guy.
Interesting. So as promised, I was going to say my piece a little bit. Amer, I actually think they are going to be top 10 offense. I think they're going to be just electric. I love Justin Herbert coming out of college. He set the world on fire. I am also very high on Austin Eckler. Most years I'm high on Austin Eckler, to be fair. But I think the Charger offense is pretty limitless in a division with bad defenses and a lot of scoring. You're talking about 6 games against Kansas City. Yes, you have to deal with guys like L'Jarius Sneed and Bashaud Breeland, but there's going to be so much scoring, so much throwing in those games. Oakland is terrible, and then Denver is also just not good. There's going to be so much firepower in this division. I'm really excited about what they can do, and I tend to overvalue targets. You're talking about receivers. We talk a lot about running backs with guaranteed touches. The proxy, in my opinion, for guaranteed touches in receiver land is targets. That's why a guy like Michael Thomas was so valuable for so long, because he would only run 8 to 10 yard slants, but he'd get 15 targets a game. So it's really a question of how you want to shape your draft. If you want a guy that's going to be 3 targets for 150 yards and 3 touchdowns, go for Amari Cooper. If you want a guy that's going to be, like Amer said, 7 for 100 and no touchdowns, go for a guy like Kein Allen, but know the risk and reward. And now, lastly, to round out our top 10 is a guy that I think it's fair to say the 3 of us were surprised actually made the top 10, but as we were going through our rankings, it just kind of happened. And now that we think about it more, it makes sense. And for this one, we're going down to Florida. And Mike Evans is our 10th receiver overall. Had a comeback year with Tom Brady down there, winning the Super Bowl. Obviously, a crowded receiver room with Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Antonio Brown, and the upstart Scotty Miller, who we never want to rule out. Not to mention Rob Gronkowski and OJ Howard, who we won't talk about too much. But looking at Mike Evans, some more dissension on this end as well. Amer has him at 13. I have him at 11. But Mike has him at 8. So a little bit higher than both of us, certainly higher than Amer, who has him 5 slots lower and actually outside wide receiver 1 territory. So some interesting stuff here to round out this list. We'll start with Mike. Why is he inside your top 10?
That's right. He is inside my top 10. I'm very excited here. I mean, he's just a physical specimen, first of all, which means that towards the red zone, they're to be looking his way. He is sort of, I think, the most physical, other than Gronk, but just in terms of wide receivers, he is the most physical there. He has such height, such strength. He has all the physical abilities. He plays on an offense that has, they're led by Tom Brady, who will score touchdowns until he's 80, I think. So obviously they know how to move the ball, and they showed that last year. I mean, it's just a very exciting time to, invest in Mike Evans, because I feel that he can be a really strong receiver. I mean, last year he was 10th overall in terms of total points in half PPR leagues. And I feel like, there were some weeks, like against the Saints, I think it was on Sunday night, where the Bucs really struggled, and I feel like this year they will have less of those nights and just sort of be a much more consistent offense, unlike some of the first half last season. And I'm really excited for Mike Evans this year.
Yeah, he's an interesting case. Certainly came on last year, a lot of mouths to feed. But Amer, I'm curious on your thoughts. And I should backtrack a little bit here. Mike Evans was 13th on your list. Now I believe he moves up to 12 with the Michael Thomas injury. But still, that is low-end wide receiver 1, high-end wide receiver 2 territory. Why so down on him, comparatively speaking?
Yeah, so I have him outside my 10 just because I'm looking at last season as the blueprint. So Bucs won the Super Bowl. So why would they really change much from last year? I think Mike's living a little bit in the past, a little bit in the Jameis gunslinger past, but this is not your older brother with Buccaneers. Mike Evans is good. Obviously, he's fantastic. But last year, you saw a lot of games where he kind of just disappeared. He was not targeted a lot. He didn't get any yards. There were games where he was 2 receptions for 2 touchdowns and 2 yards, which is is great. It's fine, but games like that, and as we mentioned before, touchdowns don't stick year to year. And so I think it'll be tough to keep up that high touchdown volume, especially with all these other options that are coming in, which is why I have him a little bit lower. But I do think that this offense is going to improve this year. I think they're actually going to be better this year than they were last year. Another year in the Bruce Arians system for Tom Brady is going to make them even better. So he's a good pick. I have him a little bit lower than some of these other guys that are more consistent. I have guys like Allen Robinson and Terry McLaurin actually ranked higher than Mike Evans this year. Just because of like I said, I think yards, targets, receptions are more trackable between seasons than touchdowns. And there were a lot of games last year that concerned me with Mike Evans where he just kind of didn't do anything. And it was the Antonio Brown show or the Chris Godwin show instead of the Mike Evans show.
Yeah, certainly a lot of mouths to feed, Amr, as you said. I'm glad you brought up Allen Robinson. I split the difference between you guys on Mike Evans. I have him in the 11th. A-Rob is the guy that I have ahead of him, like you do, Amr. I love what he brings to the table. Mike Evans is a little scary, but he's certainly one of those guys that can win you a week if he does go off. So once again, we'll keep harping on this. One of our favorite things to talk about, roster construction. So all about balance. So if you get a guy with boom bust, make sure you get a guy with floor and vice versa. But on the outside looking in, just a quick preview is Allen Robinson and Amari Cooper. We're both on the outside looking in here, as it was Chris Godwin. But that's our top 10 rounding out from Adams to Evans, top to bottom. Certainly some firepower out there on the wideouts this year. A lot of great quarterbacks thrown to them. So we're excited about what receivers have to offer. We'll close it here unless you guys have any other comments.
Good to go.
Perfect. So hope you enjoyed this. Join us next time for tight ends. This is our top 10 wide receivers for this upcoming fantasy football season. And until next time, this has been Between the 20s.